Thanks, Paul, for that report. And joining me here in the studio are my distinguished guests, Elizabeth Murray, a Senior Program Officer at the United States Institute of Peace, and Rushdi Nackerdien, Regional Director for Africa at the International Foundation for Electoral Systems. And in our New York studios, we'll be joined by Milton Allimadi, publisher and CEO of Black Star News. Welcome to you all. And Allimadi, let me start with you there in New York. Clearly, the situation... All right, I understand we're not able to hear Allimadi. Rushdi, let me turn to you here in the studio. Clearly, the situation in Uganda is still volatile, and a lot of people are afraid to get out. We understand there's uniformed officers everywhere. What do you make of this, and what is the way forward?
Thank you, Esther, and thank you for having me. I think the situation in Uganda is clearly escalating. The longer opposition leaders are held under house arrest, the more people will feel agitated, and the fact that their rights would not have been recognized, the fact that the opposition leader is wanting to lay a petition, this all just aggravates the entire situation.
And Elizabeth, coming to you also, I know that the U.S. Institute of Peace had a kind of training for the youth in Uganda, where you wanted more peace, you wanted people to go out there and vote and know that there will be some conflicts, but it doesn't necessarily mean chaos. But what we see now is a lot of tension, we see a lot of chaos. We see the leader of the opposition, Kizza Besigye, under house arrest more than 8 times now, on and off. What is the way forward in terms of peace for Uganda?
That's a great question. Certainly, the youth of Uganda and Ugandan citizens more broadly should be commended for their many important acts of peace in the lead up to the election. I think that the regime, in terms of peace moving forward, the National Resistance Movement, the ruling party, faces a number of challenges. Ugandans are really frustrated with corruption in the ruling regime. They're frustrated with unemployment, particularly youth. We have a country of more than 75% of people under age 30, and the majority of them are unemployed. There's also very, very deep polarization between the ruling parties, which we've seen has led to violence and repression in the past several weeks. So I think the NRM and President Museveni are going to, they may have some struggles to their legitimacy in the coming months and years as citizens are frustrated with the increasing repression.
Let me turn to Milton in New York. Milton, certainly the situation is volatile, as we've seen, and the leader of the opposition, Dr. Kizza Besigye, is calling for protests if he continues being under house arrest. Do you think this is a wise move, or is this a recipe for more disaster?
Well, first of all, it's even questionable whether he is the leader of the opposition or he's actually the president-elect. And I think that's what needs to be determined first, because the numbers that were being shown from the tallying stations did not match with the numbers that were ultimately released by Badru Kigundu, whom he appointed personally to be the electoral commissioner. And that's why the EU has said that he lacks competency, and that's what it really meant. So we really don't know who won these elections. I think the so-called leader of the opposition, who may actually be president-elect, has as much right as the dictator Museveni to declare himself president, in which case we would then have an audit. Let's have an audit of all the ballots, and let's determine who really won these elections. But the good thing is that the so-called election has been universally condemned and seen as not credible by people and organizations that were actually invited by General Museveni himself to observe the elections. The Commonwealth, the EU, and Ugandan election monitors all have concluded that these were not free and fair elections at all. Intimidation, violence, the abuse of state resources by the government. In fact, the Commonwealth said the state is fused together with candidate Museveni. So there was no distinction between whom Dr. Besigye was running against. Was he running against General Museveni, or was he running against the state establishment? So that's why it's fraudulent to refer to these as elections. I call them as non-elections. And then what did Mr. Museveni do? When he was not sure that he would be able to sustain this fraudulent election, he has now deployed the army in the streets. And there's a word for that. It's called a coup d'etat.
All right, Allimadi, let me get back to you shortly. Let me get the thoughts of our guests here in the studio. Definitely we'll continue that conversation. Elizabeth, if you look at the Electoral Commission, we've seen a lot of kind of social media backlash. So many people, as Allimadi says, people are not happy with the Electoral Commission. They feel that they did not tally the votes in about 1,700 polling stations that were actually supposed to be the stronghold of the opposition. What challenges do you think the Electoral Commission was facing? Do you think there was pressure from the incumbent? Or what exactly have you heard from the ground?
Indeed, there is not a lot of trust in the Electoral Commission right now. I think that Ugandans had low trust in the Electoral Commission to start, and this has been deteriorating over the past week. I believe that even those who support Museveni would acknowledge that there are defects within the Electoral Commission. It's thought to be politicized, and there were some clear deficiencies around the election time, including the delay of the delivery of materials to many polling stations, particularly in Kampala and Wasiko, which are known to be opposition strongholds. We heard reports of voters having to wait up to 6 or 7 hours and polling having to be postponed till the following day in some places. I also think that the tallying of the votes has not been particularly transparent. In fact, it's been rather opaque. And so to regain confidence, the Electoral Commission would really have to address these serious deficiencies.
And Rushdi, if I turn to you, obviously, one of the things coming out clearly about Uganda is that nobody's jubilating about Museveni's victory. I don't know, I'm not being critical here, I'm just, this is what I've noticed. I've seen a lot of people out protesting. I've seen a lot of military people coming out on the social media. We've seen pictures of people, you know, kind of afraid to even step out. And that's what is coming out of Kampala. I don't know if I'm reading this right. Have you seen anybody out there celebrating the victory?
You're quite correct in that, Esther. I think that there's been, in fact, Ugandan citizens need to be acknowledged for the fact that they have not turned violent in terms of the protest action that they have been taking, and that they've been restricting themselves to social media and other kind of mechanisms. But even in your own country, we've seen after the President Kenyatta commended President Museveni, there was a backlash by his own citizens in the region in Kenya against the announcement.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a backlash in the social media like we've not seen in Kenya in a long, long time. But let me turn to you again, Milton, there in New York. And if I understand correctly, and correct me here, that the Electoral Commission is given about 48 hours within which to announce the winner. Is there a recourse for this in case there are some problems, especially now that we're talking about some polling stations not having their votes tallied?
Right.
Would that have been an exception, at least to wait for a little bit to be able to get the votes counted and then tally them?
Well, yes, I think you raise a good question, Esther, but that would presume that we were working with an independent electoral commission. And that was not the case. When I was on the same show in November, I called that out. I said it's going to be almost impossible for Mr. Kigundu to announce a so-called winner who is different than General Museveni. And that's been the problem. You raise a very good point. That's what a competent electoral commission would have done. But since Mr. Badru Kigundu is not independent of General Museveni, we would not have expected him to do that, because I am quite sure that there's some risk involved to his personal safety. So I wouldn't expect him to do something like that. But that would have been the right thing for him to do. But nevertheless, there's an opportunity to correct this sham. Those ballots are there. We had that situation in Afghanistan where the UN became involved, and they had an audit. They ought to do the same thing in Uganda. They should allow the votes of Ugandans who actually cast their ballots to be counted, so that we know who is the rightful winner of these elections.
Milton, we'll get back to you shortly. Let me take a break, and we would like to remind you that Straight Talk Africa is now on the social networking website, Twitter, and we are tweeting live. Follow us at VOA Shaka. That's VOA Shaka, and join in on today's discussion with your questions and comments. Don't forget to use the hashtag VOA Uganda Elections. And we're still on Facebook. Just enter the keywords Straight Talk Africa. Become a fan and connect with other friends of the Voice of America. We'll be right back.